All right. Hello, hello, hello. If you don't already know, I'm Carmen. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the editorial director here at Jane, and I'm extremely excited because it is time for our fireside chat with Myra Strober and Abby Davisson, authors of Money and Love, an intelligent roadmap for life's biggest decisions. I'm like, is the book visible? Because of, there we go. And as everyone can see, got a lot out of the book, a lot of post-it flags to work through in here. And so I'm also going to drop a link in the chat to moneylovebook.com, where you can get more information about the book and grab your copy. And let me tell you a little bit about our speakers and then bring them on up here. So Abby is a social innovation leader and career development expert who most recently spent 9 years at the global retailer Gap Inc., where she served as president of the Gap Foundation and co-founded the company's employee resource group for parents. Abby, incredible. Let me bring you on up. And then also we've got Myra Strober, labor economist and professor emerita at Stanford University, the founding director of the Stanford Center for Research on Women, which is now known as the Clayman Institute for Gender Research, and the first chair of the National Council for Research on Women. Myra, it is such an honor to have you here with us today too. The Jane Club is all about honoring the work that women do and how much time and space we hold in our lives for so many other people, which is something that comes up a lot in the book. But in the spirit of that, I also just want to thank you both so much for taking the time to be with our community today and have this conversation with us. So welcome.
Thank you. You're so welcome.
We're so excited to be here.
I am very excited to talk to you all. And of course, I am recording the event for Jane on Demand. So I forgot to ask that none of the Janes record it for their own personal use, and I will make sure it's only shared internally. Okay, so let's get down to business. I always like to start chats like this with a little bit of an inception story, and I was really fascinated in the book to read about how the two of you end up co-authoring this book, and specifically about how this book is an outgrowth, Myra, of a seminar that you have been teaching for decades. And so I would love to hear a little more about the journey that brings you two together and brings this book to life.
Well, I'm happy to start, but before I do, I just want to say that it makes my heart sing to see all the places that you've marked in the book. So that's great. That's just what we hoped would happen. So I taught a course at Stanford for a long time, many decades, and Abby was one of the students in the class. And the man that she eventually married was also a student in the class. And so I knew both of them. And after they graduated, they got married and they had some little kids, very little kids at the beginning. And then they used to come back to my class to speak to the students and tell them what was going on in the trenches. And so we kept in touch. And then one day we had lunch, and I had retired from teaching. And Abby asked me how my book was going because I had told her that I wanted to write a book. And I said, well, I haven't written a word yet. And she said, you need an accountability partner. And I looked over at her. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. It was mid-August. And I said, no, I need a co-author. And so I asked her then and there, and she accepted then and there. So she can tell you the rest.
Well, I suggested an accountability partner because I had been spending time standing up the first employee resource group for parents at Gap, where I had been working and leading for many years. And I couldn't have done it without a working dad who was on the legal team, who was exactly that, like the person who I leaned on when things got hard, and we would just cheer each other on. It was so helpful. And so when Myra asked me to be her co-author, I was like, oh, that hadn't even occurred to me. But now that you're suggesting it, yes, I believe so strongly in this. It changed my life to take the class with the person who eventually became my husband. And I felt, especially since Myra had stopped teaching, that more people needed this wisdom to unlock confidence, to help them make better life decisions when money and love are involved, which is really all of the big decisions in life. And we can get more into that. But I was so delighted. And we like to say we share in the book advice about slowing down before making big life decisions. And the decision to write the book together was made in an instant. And so we didn't take our own advice. It was a case where it felt so right. As she mentioned, I mean, we joke about it, but we really did have a long relationship at that point. And we had many times over the next several years where we got to check in with each other and say, are you still wanting to do this together? And so, yes, it was made in an instant, but we had a lot of data to go on. And it was just one of the best decisions we've both ever made.
I am very glad you made the decision. And I just truly love this story so much, especially because I was fascinated just thinking about, this idea of a seminar that was grounded in so much of what is in this book, because often in my own life, I come back all the time to being like, no one ever taught me this, every tax season, I'm always like, why was there never any class on there just was never any sort of financial literacy or preparedness that was offered to me at any sort of level throughout my own, educational career. And so it was so great to feel like, oh my God, this book is such a critical touch point. It feels like the kind of book that you want to, keep it in your desk drawer, and you're going to come back to it over and over and over again throughout your life. And I'm curious, just, what was your vision, Myra, when you started the course so many years ago? And Myra and Abby, like, what did you sort of hope the book could become? And, what vision did you have for the life of the book in people's lives?
I first taught the course at Berkeley, not at Stanford. And I taught it because I realized that I had been discriminated against big time by the economics department at Berkeley. And so I started teaching the class, and at that and then work. And it continued to be called Women and Work until one year, an intrepid man took the class and said to me, this class is for men too. And if you would change the name of the class from Women and Work to Work and Family, I personally will recruit guys for you for next year. And he did. And by the time I stopped teaching the class, 40% of the students were men. And as Abby has said, the man she married took the class. The conversations were so much better in the class, having men in the class. And we think that this book is both for women and for men. The decisions that we all have to make are similar, and it's a lot easier if you have a partner who also knows the content of the book.
And as far as our vision goes, we feel so lonely and so isolated when we're in the midst of a big life decision, right? We feel like, this is just the weight of the world on me. And so what we hope is that our book helps people realize they're not alone, that so many people of all genders, ethnicities, like wherever you are in your identity, on your journey, everyone struggles with these topics. And we want people to feel more reassured. And we've been so heartened by the people who have read the book so far to say, yes, Myra got an email just the other day from someone who had taken her class and then read the book and said, I've been kicking myself because my marriage didn't work out. And I realized after reading your book that it wasn't because I approached the decision to marry this person and made a bad decision. It just didn't work out. I'm going to stop beating myself up about it. And so that, like, letting yourself off the hook and giving you a process and a way to approach making a big life decision, so that even if the decision goes sideways, you still feel like you made that decision with the best information you had at that point in time. And you can know that you did the best you could and feel more confident and more reassured as a result of that. So that's why we wanted to give people a flexible but sturdy framework that could be applied to any big life decision.
I love that. And, let's go ahead and dig into that framework. I'm fascinated by the 5 C's that you all lay out in the book, and the many ways that throughout the book you show how they can be applied, but it also becomes very clear that they can be applied to basically any major life decision, not just the kinds that are outlined in this book. And what you were touching on before about slowing down the response and getting yourself, out of that cycle of like, I got to make the response right. I got to figure it out right now. And I have to zoom in and stress out and then figure it out. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that framework and some of the key touch points that folks might be able to take away.
Well, the first part of the framework, the first C, is clarify. So the first thing you need to do when you have a big decision to make is kind of sit down with yourself, or stand up with yourself, or do anything with yourself. But think about what your goals are. And the hard part of that is untangling your goals from the goals of other people who have told you for so many years what your goals should be. Your parents, your friends, your siblings, whoever, and really think about, what is it I really want here? So that is number 1.
And the next step, once you have clarified your goals and what's important to you and your core values, is to communicate and with the people who are going to be involved in the decision. And sometimes we think that if it's a decision related to your job, it's really your decision. But the truth is that we are all operating in an ecosystem, and our decisions affect the other people in that ecosystem. And so rather than just sit down and think through and write a pro and con list, we invite people to have a conversation, which, by the way, involves speaking as well as listening. And so the communicate step is really designed to help you understand who else you should be communicating with and help you find a time and a place to give that conversation the space it deserves.
Totally.
And, clarifying and communicating is like a dance, because first you clarify, then we advocate making an appointment with whomever you're going to communicate with. Don't do it when you're trying to get the kids out the door or brushing your teeth at night and ready to go to bed. Make an appointment to talk and listen and give the person an opportunity to clarify their own goals. And then, of course, after you've heard that, you may change your mind. So you've clarified and communicated. Now you probably need to clarify again. So it goes around and around, the clarify and communicate.
Totally. Yes. It's never linear. Right. And I mean, I think once you've also, when you're going through those steps, that come after that, communication is always going to be part of those steps. And I find something that's very fascinating about the book is not only that you sort of lay out how to have conversations, with your family or the stakeholders of, these decisions that you're making, but also, it becomes clear just how much of an impact conversations can have. I was fascinated, Abby, when you two were telling the story of the two of you, that you talked about when you would guest lecture in Myra's classes, that you and your husband would use the drive down to the campus to reevaluate your relationship, which I think is something that to so many people probably sounds absolutely terrifying. Like, oh yeah, let's just have a casual conversation, sort of assessing our relationship whenever we make this long drive. And yet it becomes evident that conversation can bring people together, even if the conversation is hard. Of course, conversations can also, right, bring us clarity, like that's not going to pan out. But also that these conversations become an empowering tool for the individual who's making the decision, right? That there's this ripple effect. Myra, of your former students, starting to learn how to have these conversations, and then that sort of impacting the way that they move through all different areas of their life, their career, their family lives, their advocacy. We touch on that later in the book. I'm curious, what sort of anecdotes you two can offer of the power of following this framework and really finding the courage to move through difficult conversations instead of, avoiding them or trying to become an island and solve them all on your own.
Well, I'm so glad you bring up the work side of this, because this framework is useful at work too. And one of the men students in my class was once telling the other people in the class that he was a manager before he came back to school, and that he was a good guy. He always told his women employees that they should take the longest maternity leave they could. And one of the women in the class said, well, I didn't want to take the longest maternity leave I could. In fact, I wanted to take the shortest one I could because I don't like being around babies 24/7. And he wrote in his class evaluation how valuable that insight was for him. And he realized he had to communicate with each employee separately and in depth to find out what it was she really wanted, and not just assume that what he wanted or would have wanted if he were taking a maternity leave was what she wanted.
And I think that certainly not assuming, but being pushed to have those difficult conversations earlier than you feel comfortable. Because the truth is, you're never going to feel ready for uncomfortable, awkward conversations. And because the person that I was dating at the time in Myra's class and I happened to be taking the class at the exact right time in our lives, the big decisions were looming, whether we wanted to face them or not. We were about to graduate. We needed to decide, do we look for jobs in the same city? If we end up in that city, do we move in together? And because we were in Myra's class, and because we're nerds and pragmatic, we ended up writing our final paper on a piece of data that Myra shared, which was that couples that live together before getting married have actually higher divorce rates, which is so counterintuitive. You don't think like, oh, but why? And so we really dug into that and ended up interviewing other people who had lived together before getting married and created what became the blueprint for our marriage, our lives. And yes, we did take that 45-minute drive down to Palo Alto because we had, babies at the time. We were both working full time. Like we couldn't carve out any other time. And we were about to air our dirty laundry in front of, her entire class. We said, we should probably get something out now if we're going to, it's going to come out. Let's say it to each other before we say it to a whole class of people. And it just that concept of just pushing yourself to have the difficult conversation at a time and a place that is going to, support it has served us so well throughout all the things that life has thrown at us in the last 15 years.
I love that. And Myra, it's funny that you talk about the 5 C's being something that you can apply at work, because throughout the book, it becomes clear that, like you two are talking about, a crux of the book is that money and love are really never something that you can disentangle from one another, right? These economic realities. So whether it's the finance side or the career side, it's all intertwined with all of the other stuff of life. And that is something we are totally all about here at the Jane Club, that, it's not about work-life balance. It's about finding an integrated way to live your whole life and move through your whole life in an integrated way. And so I would love if you could dig into that a little bit too. And Myra, I also love the evolution of your course from women and work to work and family. And now here we are, money and love. And I'm just, really curious about why that language matters to you too. Those 2 words sort of became the crux of the book, and how this perspective allows you to, and the people who have taken the course and you've talked to, how seeing it that way has shifted their perspective and the way that they move through the world.
Well, let's take the decision to have a child, or more than one child. The question is when. Well, first the question is if, then when, and then how many, with how much space between, and all this question. All right, so that sounds mostly like a love decision, and most people would tell you that, whom you marry and how many children you have and when are all decisions that should be made with your heart. And surely they should be made with your heart, but they should also be made with your head, because whom you marry is probably the most important career decision you'll ever make. And I say marry, but it doesn't matter whether you marry or not. Whom you decide to live your life with, have a life partner with, that's a really important career decision. Okay. How many children you have is definitely a financial decision as well as a love decision. It's very expensive to have children, both in terms of money and also time. And, parenting today is far more intensive than it used to be. I think I read recently that full-time moms in 1970 spent as much time as working moms today, working, in the workforce. All moms work, but working in the workforce, as the full-time moms in 1970. So, parenting has become a very time-intensive endeavor. And so you want to think about, do you want children? How many? When? All of these questions.
And our conventional wisdom tells us we should separate those decisions, right? If you want to think about what career you want and a financial decision, think about it with your head and really analyze it. And if you have a love decision, pay attention to your heart and how you feel. But compartmentalizing the two decisions does everyone a great disservice, because every big life decision has an element of money and an element of love. And so if you're only thinking about one or the other, you're missing a big part of the picture. And when we're able to look at these decisions holistically, we're likely to make a decision that A, we won't regret, and B, helps us get more of what we're looking for, the meaning, the fulfillment, the purpose, the things that are important to us, which hopefully you've clarified with the first C.
Absolutely. And, I think something that really comes through, obviously, in the book is that for women in particular, money and love are also areas in which gendered expectations and gender bias, and all that good stuff definitely come into play. And I really loved this this Be the Change section that sort of ended the book, about how, obviously once you've moved through all of these decisions, you're probably going to realize that the cards are not stacked fairly, and that there's a lot that's broken, about our economy, and our economic systems. And, I loved you talking about tempered radicals and using the 5 C's to affect change and become change agents from within. And I would love to hear from the two of you about, how all of us today can sort of go back to our day and start engaging within broken systems and workplaces to find that opportunity for renewal.
Abby, tell your story.
Well, tempered radical is a term that I learned through Deborah Myerson, another professor who I studied with at Stanford. And it's really about people who want to make change from within systems. And I was never one to have a bullhorn and go, protest outside of, big companies. I saw myself as an entrepreneur, and I've done that over and over in my career in different ways. And when I was at Gap, there were 70% women. There were many working parents. And despite all that, I think, and the statistic that always stopped me in my tracks is that 2 babies were born a day and joined someone in the Gap Inc. family. So there were just a ton of people welcoming new little ones into their world. And the company had recently reinvested in expanding their paid leave program, including to the people who work in stores, which is huge, and more companies should certainly do that. But there was no formal community for any of the parents. And so I saw an opportunity to find allies. We talk a lot about finding allies in the chapter, communicate with them about what's important to us. I found this working dad, Will, who was in the legal team and had left the world of corporate law to go in-house because he wanted to spend more time with his family. And we joined together and stood up a formal group, made the business case to the company about why it made sense to have parents at Gap Inc. in addition to Black at Gap and all the other Pride at Gap affinity groups and resource groups that existed. And, thankfully this was before COVID hit, because truly once everyone was Zooming in, helping their kids with remote school and then running back to their Zooms, and we all needed that community more than ever. And so it really truly was an opportunity to find something that could be changed and find the other people who cared about that, use data, check in, find the compelling case, and then create something that would outlast me. I mean, I'm no longer with the company, and that group still exists, and they're still supporting working parents and building a community and making sure that the benefits that are afforded to the group are relevant and useful. And that to me is, how we are going to change these broken systems and make sure that our future generations, my kids, are not going to have to live in a world where we are faced with such suboptimal choices and feel like we're making trade-offs all the time because of the policies and the laws and the institutions that exist.
So incredible. And I also love the sort of path from this course to that moment in your life, because I think it also becomes very evident in that chapter that, if we can't have conversations about these subjects, about, what accommodations or, flexibility we might need as parents, what kind of resources we might need as women, as queer people, as people of color, when we're at work or in any space. If we can't have those conversations with the people closest to us, building that vocabulary and that muscle to have these kinds of hard conversations and move through these kinds of challenging decisions ultimately can lead us to that point of being ready to grab the bullhorn, like you said, and sort of become an advocate and really have that confidence that, you can just roll up and say what is needed. Like, I loved the story about the nurse who is in $1 billion new hospital that was designed entirely by men, so it has no nursing room, even though she's in the children's wing, and basically just goes ahead and tells her supervisor that it's not working out and it's not okay over him going in there to get a cup of coffee. Because I feel like it's the kind of thing where you build up that vocabulary and that muscle, and then you can move into these conversations about the solutions to the things that you're struggling with and moving through.
Partly some of this is just renaming what you're already doing. So for example, for women who are out of the workforce right now, for whatever reason, they can be change agents, as women have been for generations in their children's schools. There are lots of things you can do with allies to make the school better for your kids and for yourself and so on. So my point is, you don't have to be at work to be a change agent. You can be a change agent in your community, at your kid's school, in the larger political world. There's lots of opportunities.
And until people, I think why we ended with that chapter is we felt like it's great for people to be able to solve their money and love challenges individually. We certainly see the value in that, and Myra has helped thousands of students over the years who have had the good fortune to take her course, and we want to help many more with the book. But until the larger systems around us change, we are all going to keep having to solve the same money and love decisions. And so we really need to shift the narrative and the conditions that we're all facing. And that's going to happen through brave people creating change, ripple effects in whatever community or institution they have the power to affect.
Yes, I love it. That's so powerful and so true. You know, we can all play a part in changing what happens tomorrow. And, you know, we are in this, you talked about the pandemic, and I was also surprised to read in the book that you all began to embark on this book before the pandemic happened. And I can only imagine how many changes had to be made to the chapters that you were writing as you were moving through the pandemic. And it's just been, you know, it's been such a tough moment, and we're still not through that moment, you know, and we're never going to be on the side of that moment we were on before it happened. And it feels like there's all these compounding challenges, feels like some things are moving backwards. And I'm just wondering, you know, you lay out so much advice in this book about everything from, you know, dating to marriage, to children, to managing your household, to divorce, to elder care. It's so exhaustive. It's like a lifelong journey that you're taking us on with you all. And I'm just wondering, like, what would be the advice that you would want to leave our Janes with today when we find ourselves in this moment, and when we're facing these kinds of challenges, you know, culturally and also in our own lives?
Well, I think the main takeaway of the book is what we talked about before. Love and money decisions are intertwined. They need to be made carefully. And one of the advantages of our framework, our 5 C's framework, is that in order to go through it, you have to slow down. So don't make these decisions on impulse. I had one acquaintance who was unhappy because her babysitter told her that she missed her baby's first steps, which is crazy because, you know, the baby takes a lot of first steps, falls down, starts all over again. And she was so upset with this that she quit her job that day. So, you know, that's an example of what not to do. And so slow down, make your decisions in a reasoned way, communicate your intentions with the people who are going to be affected. And, you know, my father had great advice, which I will summarize as, do your best, angels can't do better. So, you know, you've made your decision, you've done the best you can. And if things don't turn out the way you'd hoped, at least you know that you gave it your best shot.
I love that.
Yeah, we really want this to be empowering for people, right? It can often feel so disempowering when we're in the middle of these charged moments and you're like, oh, I just don't know what to do. It feels like neither choice is good. But by following our framework, by reading the book and realizing you're not alone, there are so many people who are facing different flavors of this, you can find confidence, community, and reassurance to know that, as Myra said, you're doing the best you can. We have some steps we think will help.
And one last thing, we also now have an audio course, an
online course.
An online course. So that delivers our content in very small units. And so for people who are really busy, I can picture a new mom listening to our class and digesting it day by day. So you don't have to read the book if that's not something that you can do right now.
Awesome. Thank you for letting us know that. And thank you both so much for being here. I'm like, I could talk to you for so many more hours. My final closing piece of advice for all the Janes is get your copy of Money and Love. Get a little Post-it deck ready so that you can also mark up everything that strikes you. I'm dropping that Money Love Book link in the chat one more time. It's just moneylovebook.com if you're watching this on Jane on Demand. And thank you, Myra and Abby, for being here, for writing this book, for doing this work, and for taking the time to share it with us today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. I'm just gonna